The alarm cut through my sleep like a blade. I rolled off my bunk before my eyes were even open, my 3 hearts hammering a rhythm I had not felt in 30 long cycles. On the station's silent eye, that alarm meant only one thing. Something had moved inside the dead veil, and nothing ever moved inside the dead veil. I am Warden Kess. For most of my life, I have kept watch over this forbidden region of space from a solitary post at the edge of known worlds. The dead veil is a wound in the galaxy. It churns with colors that have no right to exist, and every vessel that has ever attempted to enter has been swallowed whole. No signal has ever returned. No probe has ever come back. The 7 founding races of the Galactic Concord had all ventured near it 10,000 cycles ago. Every child in the galaxy learns the same lesson. Stay away from a veil. The veil consumes and never returns what it takes. Yet here I was, sprinting down the narrow corridor of my station, and the alarm was still screaming. I burst onto the command deck in my sleeping clothes. My second, Brix, was already at his post, his long fingers moving swiftly across the controls. Yala, my young sensor officer, sat frozen in her chair, her wide eyes fixed on the main display. And in the corner, the Concord liaison, Ovsik, stood with his arms folded, his lean face pale as bone. Warden, Brix said without turning, you need to see this. I crossed to the main screen. My breath stopped. A ship was emerging from the veil. Not going in, coming out. The vessel was small, perhaps 200 meters in length, and it looked as though it had been hauled through the underworld and back. Its hull was scorched black in long streaks. Sections of its outer plating were missing. A thin trail of glowing gas followed behind it, like a wounded creature leaving a path of light. It crept forward, engines flickering, as if it might fail before it reached open space. That is impossible, I whispered. I have confirmed the reading 3 times, Brix said. The ship is real. It is leaving the veil under its own power. Yala finally spoke, her voice unsteady. Warden, I am detecting a transponder signal. It is old, very old. The code format predates the Concord's registry reforms. Run it, I said. She tapped her console. A name appeared on the screen in plain white letters. The translator hesitated over the character for a moment, then resolved to a clear reading. Earth Vessel Dawn Chaser, Human Registry, listed as missing in action 400 standard cycles ago. The command deck went silent. I knew that name. Every warden knew that name. The Dawn Chaser was legend, a ghost story. For centuries ago, a small human crew had flown too near the veil during an early exploration mission. The ship vanished without trace. It was one of the earliest warnings humanity received about the Forbidden Zone. After that, even the stubborn humans had agreed to maintain their distance. The Dawn Chaser became a lesson, a tragedy, a closed file, and now it was crawling out of the darkness with its running lights still on. Orders, Warden? Brix asked. Ovsik finally moved. He stepped forward, his long robe whispering against the metal floor. The directive is clear. Concord law mandates the immediate removal of any vessel emerging from the veil. No exceptions. No delays. You will fire on that ship, Warden Kess. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on the screen. Warden, Ovsik said, his voice sharper now. The law is not a suggestion. Hold that order, I said quietly. Ovsik made a sound in his throat. You cannot hold a Concord directive. You must act. I said hold. Yala looked between us with fear in her expression. Brix kept his eyes forward, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. The room felt heavier than the gravity plates could account for. Then the screen shifted. A small green symbol appeared in the corner. An incoming signal. They are hailing us, Yala said. I stared at that small green light. My whole body felt cold. A ship that should not exist was calling me from a place that should not allow any signal to pass. My training told me to cut the connection. My instinct said something else entirely. Put it through, I said. Warden, Ovsik snapped. This violates every protocol we have. Put it through, yeah? She obeyed. The voice that came through the speakers was measured, exhausted, and almost gentle. It spoke in an old form of human English, and the translator moved quickly to render it clear. This is Captain Amara Vale of the Earth vessel Dawn Chaser. We are short on power and short on supplies. We request permission to dock. And if it is not too much to ask, a hot meal would be a miracle right about now." No one on the deck moved. No one breathed. A human voice, alive, speaking to me from a ship lost 400 years ago. I found my own voice somewhere at the back of my throat. "Captain Vale, this is Warden Kess of Station Silent Eye. Please confirm your status. How many aboard?" 83 souls, Warden," she said. "All accounted for, all breathing. Most of us rather tired." 83. The original Dawn Chaser had launched with a crew of 40. That figure was in every historical file. 40 humans went in. 83 were coming out. My mind could not hold it. Ovsik stepped close to me. His voice dropped to a whisper meant for my ears alone. "Warden, listen carefully. Whatever is on that ship is not human. Nothing survives inside the veil. Whatever speaks to us now wears a stolen face. You know this. You have served long enough to know this. Give the order. Burn the ship. Protect your station. Protect your career. Protect us all." I turned my head and looked at him. His expression was grave. His fingers trembled, just slightly against the edge of his sleeve. I had served alongside Ovsik for 11 cycles. I had never seen his hands tremble before. That tiny tremor gave me more pause in his words. I turned back to the screen. The Dawn Chaser was drifting nearer to our station. Its engines were failing. If I did not act soon, it would either collide with our shields or perish in the cold. Either way, the decision would be stripped from me. "Captain Vale," I said, "please stand by. I need a moment." "Understood, Warden," came a composed reply. "We are not going anywhere quickly." I muted the channel and turned to my crew. Bricks watched me with quiet patience. Yala looked young and frightened. Ovsik looked furious. "Bricks," I said, "what do your instruments tell you about that ship?" "It is damaged but stable." I read 83 life signs. Human biology. Body temperatures are low, indicating hunger and exhaustion. I detect no weapons active, no aggressive systems online. The ship is, by every reading I have, precisely what it claims to be. "Y'all," she swallowed. "The energy signature around the hull is unusual. It carries traces of veil radiation, but the levels are falling rapidly. Whatever was clinging to them is releasing its hold. I think the ship is carrying something with it, but nothing alive. Something more like a remnant." "A remnant?" I said. "That is the nearest word I have, Warden." Ovsik made a sound again. "Fanciful nonsense. You would gamble all our lives on a young officer's impressions." "I would wager my own life," I said, "on a young officer's honesty. There is a difference." I turned back to the screen and reopened the channel. "Captain Vale," I said, "I am granting you emergency docking at Bay 3. You will be placed under full quarantine on arrival. Your crew will be treated with respect, but none of you will leave the quarantine level until I am satisfied. Do you accept these terms?" A brief pause. Then the measured voice returned, and I thought I detected something like relief beneath it. "We accept, Warden Kess, and thank you. You have no idea what this means to us." "I suspect," I said slowly, "that I am about to find out." I closed the channel. Ovsik stared at me with unconcealed contempt. "You have just ended your career, Warden. I will report every word of this, every choice, every hesitation." "Report whatever you must," I said. "I will answer for my decisions. But tonight, I will not fire upon 83 weary souls who cross an impossible sea to come home." He turned sharply and walked off the command deck. I watched the Dawn Chaser limp toward my station. Its running lights blinked weakly, one after another, like a heart still struggling to beat. Somewhere inside that battered hull, 83 humans were preparing to meet a galaxy that had long since counted them among the dead. I did not know what they had witnessed in the veil. I did not know what they had carried back with them. I did not know whether I had just protected my people or condemned them. But I knew one thing without question. The galaxy I had guarded for 30 cycles was about to change forever, and I, old, stubborn Warden Kess, was standing at the very threshold where that change would enter. I drew a long breath and straightened my uniform. "Bricks," I said, "Let's go meet our ghosts." The quarantine level of Silent Eye was a long white corridor with thick glass walls and soft overhead lighting. It had never been used. In 30 cycles, I had walked past those empty rooms 1,000 times, and every time I regarded them as wasted metal. Now they were about to receive the first visitors in the history of my station. I stood at the observation window with Bricks at my side, and Yala stepped behind us. My uniform was straight. My hands were folded at my back. I worked hard to appear composed. Inside, my hearts were racing like startled animals. The docking clamps engaged, the outer airlock unsealed, and one by one the humans came through. They moved slowly, in a single file, with a deliberate economy of people who had learned not to squander energy. Their clothing had been mended many times over. Some pieces appeared to be remnants of original ship uniforms. Others were fashioned from materials I did not recognize. Strange woven fibers, dull plates of hammered metal. One man wore a scarf made from what appeared to be dried veil moss, and I made a considerable effort not to stare. Their faces were drawn. Their eyes were steady. They did not look afraid. They did not carry themselves like survivors who had just been rescued. They moved like soldiers returning from a long campaign, uncertain which banner would be waiting to receive them. At the front of the line walked a woman of middle years. Her hair was silver at the temples and dark at the back. She wore an old officer's coat that had clearly been restored many times. A faded rank pin still rested on her collar. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had given commands in places where commands were the only thread keeping people alive. Captain Amara Vale. She stepped into the main quarantine chamber, looked directly at the observation glass, and found my eyes through it. She raised one hand in a simple greeting. "Warden Kess, I presume," she said. Her voice through the speakers carried the same steadiness I had heard on the bridge. "Captain Vale," I replied. "Welcome to Silent Eye." "Thank you for not destroying us," she said. A small smile crossed her lips. "I understand that was a preferred course of action. It was," I said honestly, "I chose a different one." "I am grateful." Behind her, the remainder of her crew filed into the chamber. They did not rush toward the food and water we had laid out. They did not even glance at the cots along the wall. They arranged themselves in a neat line behind their captain and waited. One by one, Bricks counted them through the glass. 83, he said quietly. All confirmed. I stepped closer to the window. "Captain Vale, I must ask, the original Dawn Chaser carried a crew of 40. Where did the others come from?" She did not answer immediately. She looked back at her people, then faced me with a level gaze. "They were born, Warden," she said. "Some of them, at least. Children, grown now. Others were recovered from vessels that had entered the Veil long before us, and never emerged intact. We found them. We took them in. We taught them our language. They became part of our crew." "Other ships," I repeated. "How many?" 3 that we could account for. 2 from species I had never encountered before. 1 from a civilization that I believe your records would classify as extinct. Bricks made a soft sound beside me. Yala whispered something in her own tongue, some old invocation of her people. "That is not possible," I said. "Warden," Captain Vale said gently, "nearly nothing that is true about the Veil is possible by the standards you were given. I understand how extraordinary this must sound. I remember how extraordinary the first truth sounded to me, and I had already flown into the thing." I raised a hand. "Captain," I must proceed carefully. "My liaison has already filed a report demanding your removal. If I cannot give the Concord a reason to hear you out, they will silence all of us. I need you to tell me what happened to your ship, from the beginning, slowly and in sequence, so I can follow." She nodded. I would be honored. She turned to her first officer, a tall man with short gray beard, and spoke briefly. He nodded and began directing the crew in small clusters toward the food and the cots. Then Captain Vale settled onto a plain metal bench near the glass. I drew up a chair on my side, and she began. "For 100 of your cycles ago," she said, "our ship entered the Veil as part of an exploration mission. We went in willingly. We went in proud. We believed we would find a new frontier, new knowledge, new purpose. What we found instead was a tempest unlike anything we had ever conceived. Time moved differently inside, she continued. Our instruments told us that for every year we lived, many more passed outside. At first we refused to trust our own readings. It seemed like a malfunction, but the stars shifted too quickly. The silence grew too absolute. Eventually we accepted it. We were no longer traveling through space in any ordinary sense. We were drifting through something older, something that did not obey the rules we had built our science upon. How long did you live in there? I asked. By our own reckoning, approximately 19 years. 19 years. For 100 outside. The disparity was too vast in my mind to hold cleanly. In those 19 years, she said, we learned 3 great truths. I would like to share them with you now, Warden, because once I speak them, you will not be able to unknow them. And I want you to understand what you are choosing when you decide whether to believe me. I took a slow breath. Speak, Captain. She raised one finger. First, the dead veil is not a natural region of space. It was constructed, built by hands and minds, or something resembling them, long before any race in your Concord learned to shape fire. It is a cage, a prison, a seal placed around something that must never be permitted to leave. She raised a second finger. Second, the thing within the seal is not a single entity. It is many. They are ancient. They sleep. They dream. We named them the Quiet Ones, because for most of our time in the veil, they never spoke, never stirred, never opened their eyes. But they dreamed, and their dreams reached outward. She raised a third finger. Third, for many thousands of your cycles, those dreams have been seeping through the seal, softly, gradually, touching every mind in your galaxy, shaping your counsels, dimming your curiosity, teaching you, without your awareness, to fear the veil and keep your distance from it, so that no one would ever draw close enough to repair the fractures in the prison walls. I stared at her. That is a weighty set of claims, Captain. I said at last, I know. You are hearing me say that the Concord itself, the law that forbids us from the veil, the old stories we teach our children, all of it may originate from creatures inside the veil murmuring to us while we sleep. That is precisely what I am telling you. Then why did they not murmur to you? I asked. She smiled. It was a tired smile, but something fierce lived behind it. Because human minds, she said, are noisy. We dream chaotically. We argue with our own thoughts. We reverse our feelings 3 times in an hour. We are not orderly. We are not still. The quiet ones could reach into the clear waters of other minds, but ours are full of turbulence and static. Their voices drowned in us. They could not make us comply. They could not even make us listen. So for 19 years inside their cage, we move among them like insects they could not catch. And we watched, and we learned. I turned to Bricks. His long face was unreadable. I turned to Yala. Her eyes were wet. Warden, she whispered, when I was small, my grandmother told me I must never dwell too long on the veil. She said dwelling on it brought nightmares. My mother told me the same. My teachers as well. Every one of them cautioned me not to think about it. I never once questioned why. I had received the same instruction. I had passed the same instruction to young wardens under my charge. I had never once asked where that teaching originated. Captain, I said slowly, if what you say is true, why return at all? You had survived. You had a ship. You could have remained somewhere in the outer dark and lived out your lives in peace. Her expression became grave. Because the seal is fracturing, Warden, she said. We repaired what we could while we were inside. We used every tool, every spare component, every application of human stubbornness we possessed. But we are not the builders. We are only the visitors who witness the damage. The cage will not endure. When it gives way, the quiet ones will rouse fully. And when they rouse, they will no longer whisper. They will direct. She leaned forward, and every mind in this galaxy that has been softened by their dreams for 10,000 cycles will bow without understanding why. We came back to warn you, she said. We came back because someone must tell this galaxy to wake before it is too late, and because we are tired of being the only loud minds in the sleeping universe. I was silent for a long time. Finally, I said, Captain Vale, if I bring this account to the Concord, they will call me unwell. They may relieve me of my post. They will certainly try to suppress your crew. Everything you have told me stands against every law I have served. I know, she said. I am not asking you to believe me tonight. I am asking you to listen and to watch. Watch the people around you. Watch your liaison. Watch your admirals. Watch how they speak when the Vale is mentioned. Notice if their voices flatten. Notice if their eyes go dull. Notice if they begin repeating phrases that do not quite belong to them. I thought of Ovsic. I thought of the trembling in his hands. I will watch, I said. That is all I ask now. I rose slowly. My legs felt heavier than they should. I looked at the crew settling in behind her. A tall young man was helping an older woman to a cot. 2 children, born inside the Vale, were eating carefully with the deliberate manners of those who had learned that food was not to be wasted. A small boy, perhaps 7 cycles old, glanced up and waved at me through the glass. I raised my own hand in return. Rest, Captain, I said. Eat, sleep. We will speak again soon. Thank you, Warden. I turned and walked down the long white corridor with Brix and Yala behind me. None of us spoke until we reached the lift. Then Brix said quietly, Warden, if even a single word of that account is accurate, we are standing on a surface that may give way beneath us at any moment. I know, I said, and if every word is accurate? I looked at him. Then we are not on a surface at all. Brix, we are already falling. We simply have not registered it yet. The lift doors closed, and we rose together to begin the hardest vigil of my life. That night I could not sleep. I sat in my small office with the lights turned low and the door sealed. On my desk lay my personal data pad, the one I had carried through 30 cycles of service. On its screen, I had opened every file I could locate concerning the history of the Concord's prohibition on the Dead Vale. I told myself I was performing my duty. I told myself I only wished confirmed that the captain's account was false. But in truth, I was testing my own memory. I was examining the world I had always inhabited. What I found unsettled me more than anything the humans had said. The original prohibition on the Vale had been drafted by a small council 10,000 cycles ago. I had always believed it was ratified by the wise founders of the Concord, figures who understood precisely what they were doing. But when I examined the old annotations behind the law, I found something I had never noticed before. The council had been in fierce dispute in the days preceding the vote. Some members had wished to study the Vale. Others had wanted to dispatch probes. A few had even advocated sending volunteer teams inside. Then, overnight, every single member of that council reversed position. All of them, simultaneously. By morning, they voted unanimously to prohibit any approach to the Vale in perpetuity. The annotations read simply that they had all arrived at a shared understanding in the night. A shared understanding in the night. I sat back in my chair and felt a cold thread trace down my spine. I searched further. I found records of every warden who had ever petitioned for authorization to scan the Vale more thoroughly. Every petition had been refused. Many of those wardens had subsequently died in quiet accidents, cardiac events, falls, unexplained incidents. One had simply walked out of an airlock without his suit, for reasons no one could explain. The records called them tragedies. I had always called them tragedies. Tonight, I was less certain. I searched for the language. In the old addresses of Concord leaders, I began to detect a pattern. Certain phrases recurred across thousands of cycles, across many different species and tongues. Phrases that sounded reasonable in isolation, but which, read together, had the cadence of a lullaby. The Vale protects us by being left undisturbed. To study the Vale is to invite ruin. The prudent close their eyes to what is not meant to be observed. I had spoken those phrases myself. I had passed them to young wardens. They had always felt like common sense. Tonight, reading them in sequence, they felt like a hand resting gently on my brow, urging me to return to sleep. My door chimed softly. I closed the files and opened the door. Yala stood there. Her eyes were red, whether from weeping or from sleeplessness. I could not tell. Warden, she said, I must speak with you, not as an officer, as someone who is frightened. I waved her in. She sat across from me and folded her small hands in her lap. "I cannot stop thinking about what Captain Vale said," she whispered. "About the dreams. I have been recalling things. Warden, small things. My whole life I have experienced a strange sensation whenever anyone mentioned the veil, a sensation like a door closing somewhere in my mind. I assumed it was ordinary fear. Every child has fears. But tonight, after hearing her words, I tried to push against that sensation. I tried to genuinely think about the veil, to ask real questions about it. And the moment I did, a sharp pain started behind my eyes, like a warning. She looked at me. "Warden, a warning from whom?" I took a slow breath. I did not answer immediately, because I had a duty of care to her, and I did not wish to deepen her distress beyond what was necessary. But I also had a duty of honesty, and I had carried that duty above all others my entire career. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I have been reviewing old Concord records tonight. I believe the captain may be telling the truth. I am not yet entirely certain, but I think it is possible." She closed her eyes and nodded, as if I had only confirmed something she had already accepted. "Then what do we do?" she asked. "For now," I said, "we observe, we learn, we stay alive. We do not trust carelessly, but we do not fear without evidence. We gather proof. We determine who on the station and beyond it can be relied upon, and we prepare ourselves for the possibility that everything we were taught was arranged in our minds by forces we cannot perceive. That is a great deal to carry." "Yes," I said, "it is." A moment of quiet passed. Then she said, "Warden, when I was 8 cycles old, I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to study the strange regions of space. My teachers told me I was capable. But whenever I tried to study the veil, I would grow drowsy. I would lose my page. I would surface later with no memory of what I had read. Eventually, I gave up and trained as a censor officer. I told myself I lacked the aptitude for the science track. I told myself I was simply too weak." Her voice fractured. "Warden, I was not weak." I reached across the desk and placed my hand gently over hers. "No," I said, "you were not weak. You were too loud, Yalla, loud enough that they had to keep putting you back to sleep." Tears came then, and she did not try to hold them. "Not yet. I cannot know who among us may carry words to ears we cannot identify." "I understand, Warden." She left quietly. I sat alone for a long while, my hand still warm where hers had rested. Then I rose, crossed my window, and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond the edge of my station, the dead veil churned in silence, containing its ancient prisoners and its ancient secrets. And further still, across the vast dark of space, a Concord fleet was certainly already being assembled, summoned by the report of a liaison who feared what he could not comprehend. They would arrive soon, and when they did, I would have to stand before them, one tired warden with one small crew, and tell them that the laws they had honored their whole lives had been authored in a dream none of them had chosen. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and shut my eyes. "Old stars," I murmured into the dark, "give me strength. I believe I am about to become the loudest mind I have ever been." Behind me, on my desk, the small green indicator of an incoming message began to pulse. I turned slowly. The sender's identification was Concord High Command. I read the brief message twice. My heart went cold. A fleet was en route, commanded by Admiral Tessenball of the ruling Senate, one of the highest figures in all the Concord, a woman I had admired since my cadet days, a woman whose addresses I had memorized, a woman whose portrait hung in halls of honor across 100 worlds. She would arrive in 2 rotations. Her orders, the message stated, were simple and absolute. Neutralize the human vessel. Neutralize the humans. Neutralize, if required, the station that had failed to neutralize them first. I sat down slowly. I studied the message for a long time. Then, with great care, I reached forward and deleted it. It would change nothing. Her fleet would still come. But for that one small moment, I refused to allow her words to inhabit my machines. I refused to be the one who carried her death warrant into my own corridors. I rose, straightened my uniform, and returned to the quarantine level. Captain Vale was awake, seated near the glass as though she had known I would return. She looked up at me with composed eyes. "How many rotations do we have?" she asked. I stared at her. "How did you know?" "Warden," she said softly, "I have been outrunning this moment for 19 years. I can sense it approaching the way a sailor senses a coming storm." I sat across from her. "2 rotations," I said. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Then we have 2 rotations to give the galaxy a reason to hear us. Let us not waste them." I looked at this exhausted human woman, this improbable captain, this loud mind that had endured a prison built from dreams. And for the first time in many long cycles, I felt something stir in my chest that I had nearly forgotten existed. Hope. Stubborn, quiet, dangerous hope. "Captain Vale," I said, "tell me everything you know about how to rouse a sleeping mind. We are going to need all of it." She smiled. "That," she said, "is my favorite subject." And we began. For the next 2 rotations, my station did not rest. In the quarantine chamber, Captain Vale and her officers spoke without ceasing. They shared everything they had learned inside the veil. They showed us drawings made of the vast, slumbering shapes they had observed. They played recordings of the low harmonic sounds that seeped through the walls of their shelters. They explained with careful and patient precision how a person could learn to recognize when a thought was not their own. Bricks documented every word. Yala prepared copies on concealed drives. One hidden inside a maintenance drone, another within the lining of her uniform, a third in a location she refused to disclose even to me. I did not scold her. I was proud. A loud mind finds many places to shelter its truth. I moved through the station with new perception. I watched every member of my crew. I listened to how they spoke when the veil arose in passing conversation. Most of them shifted their gaze. Most of them redirected the subject. A few, Bricks among them, grew thoughtful and alert, their expressions sharpening as though they detected a draft in a room that should have been sealed. Ovsik I observed most closely of all. He had remained in his quarters for much of the first rotation. When he emerged, he moved with a rigid, extended stillness that did not seem natural. His eyes blinked less frequently than they ought. He spoke in clipped, level phrases. When I greeted him in the corridor, he turned toward me slowly, like a door swinging on stiff hinges. "Warden Kess," he said, "the Admiral will be here shortly. I trust you are preparing to receive her with full ceremony." "Of course," I said. "Every courtesy will be extended." "Good." His mouth arranged itself into the shape of a smile. His eyes did not participate. It would be regrettable to see such a distinguished career conclude in dishonor. "I have no intention of concluding my career in dishonor, Ovsik." "No," he said. "I am certain you do not." He passed me and continued down the corridor. I watched him go. Captain Vale's words returned to me. "Notice if their eyes go dull." Ovsik's eyes, I understood now, had been dull for a long time. I had simply never permitted myself to see it. That evening I gathered Bricks, Yal, and 3 other officers I had been quietly assessing, and led them to a small meeting room deep in the lower levels of the station, far removed from any common channel. I secured the door behind us. I told them everything. I told them what Captain Vale had said. I told them what I had found in the old council records. I told them about the repeating phrases in Concord addresses, the quiet ends of curious wardens, the unanimous decision reached in a single night 10,000 cycles ago. I told them about Ovsik's dull eyes. I told them that Admiral Tessenval, the hero of my youth, was coming to my station with orders to destroy every human aboard, and if necessary, every one of us with them. They sat in silence when I finished. Brick spoke first, in his measured way. "Warden," he said, 3 days ago I would have told you that you had lost your clarity. Tonight, I find that I have been asking myself why I was always so quick to abandon any serious thought about the veil. Now that I apply myself to it, I can think about it directly. The fog is not deep in me, but I can feel where it used to settle. like a garment I had worn for so long I had forgotten it was not part of me. Yala nodded. The three other officers, whom I had selected because they were restless and because they sometimes challenged me on minor matters, each nodded in turn. It seemed, as Captain Vale had suggested, that the minds the quiet ones could not easily reach were the ones that questioned, the ones that resisted, the ones that would not sit still. "What do you need from us, Warden?" Brix asked. I placed my hands flat on the table. "I need you to stand with me," I said. "When the Admiral arrives, I will refuse her order. I will protect the humans. I will transmit their testimony to every station within range on an open channel, so that it cannot be suppressed in a single action. Some who hear it will believe. Some will not. Some will be alert enough to understand. Some will not. But once the words are out, they cannot be gathered back." "That is treason," one of the officers said quietly. "Yes," I replied without wavering. "By Concord law it is treason. By the law I feel in my own chest. It is the only honest act remaining to me." I looked around the room at each of them. "I will not compel any of you to follow me into this. If you wish to depart the station tonight, I will authorize your transfer papers immediately. I will not record your names in any connection with this matter. You will be as protected as I am able to make you. But if you choose to stand with me, you must understand what that means. We are stepping away from the sanctioned path. We are becoming loud minds in a galaxy that has been kept quiet for 10,000 cycles. There will be no swift reward. There may not even be survival. There will only be the truth and the opportunity to carry it to others." No one moved. Then Yellow lifted her chin, her eyes bright. "I am loud, Warden," she said. "I have been loud my entire life. I simply never had permission to acknowledge it. I stand with you." Brix gave a slow, composed nod. "Warden, I followed you for 30 cycles because you were fair. I follow you tonight because you are also courageous. I stand with you." The three other officers, one after another, said the same. I felt my throat tighten. I cleared it. "Thank you," I said. "Now we have a great deal of work ahead of us." We divided the responsibilities. Brix would prepare the long-range transmission array for a signal that could not be easily disrupted. Yala would secure the duplicate copies of the human testimony. One officer would manage food and water for the humans in case the coming confrontation compromised our supply lines. Another would discreetly prepare escape pods, not for ourselves, but for any crew member who reconsidered at the last moment. We would not penalize anyone for fear. Fear was not a failing on my station. The third officer, a steady, seasoned woman named Brenna, whom the humans had begun to teach their old operational language, I asked to remain close to Captain Vale and absorb everything she could in the hours that remained. Then I went to speak with Captain Vale myself. She was waiting near the glass, as she always seemed to be. "Admiral Tessenval arrives tomorrow," I said. "I have decided not to comply with her order." She studied me for a long time. "Warden Kess," she said softly, "do you understand what this will cost you?" "I understand some of it," I said. "I expect the remainder will instruct me in its own time." She placed her palm against the glass. I raised mine and pressed it to hers, the cold, transparent barrier between us. "Captain Vale," I said, "I've served 30 cycles as a warden of the Concord. For most of those cycles, I was proud. I have lately come to understand that some of that pride was applied to a wall I did not build. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting your crew has been the clearest, most fully lived moment of my entire service. I am grateful for it." Her eyes shone. "Warden," she said, "I was young when I stepped aboard the Dawn Chaser. I believed I was going to witness wonders. I witnessed terrors instead. And then, for 19 years, I lived with the fear that when we emerged, if we emerged, no one in the galaxy would hear us. I prepared myself to be dismissed. I prepared myself to be targeted. I did not prepare myself to be believed. You prepared well then for the harder road." I said, "We are not clear of danger yet." "No," she agreed. "But tonight, at least, I am not alone in the truth. That is a gift I did not dare to expect." We held our palms against the glass a moment longer. Then I stepped back and inclined my head to her. She returned the gesture. We both understood the storm was nearly upon us, and we both intended to remain standing in it. The Admiral's fleet arrived just after the station's second dawn. I stood on the command deck in my formal uniform, with Brix at my right and Yala at my left. Brenna waited by the communications console. The other two officers were at their stations, composed and ready. In the quarantine chamber below, Captain Vale and her crew waited in calm stillness, aware of what was coming, trusting us to do what had to be done. Osik occupied a corner of the deck, his eyes flat, his hands clasped before him. On the main screen, the fleet materialized. 12 warships bearing the silver markings of the inner core. At their center moved the command vessel Calm Horizon, the personal ship of Admiral Tessenball. The channel opened without our invitation. A tall figure appeared on our screen. Admiral Tessenball stood in her command room, her silver hair drawn tight, her uniform precise as a blade's edge. She had been my model of service since I was a cadet. I had once wept in my bunk listening to a recording of her speak about honor. Looking at her now, I noticed the first time that her eyes did not move as a living person's eyes moved. They traversed from one side to the other in slow, measured arcs, as though she were reading lines already prepared for her. "Warden Kess," she said. Her voice was the same voice that had once moved me. It no longer did. "You have received my directive." "I have, Admiral." Then explain to me why the human vessel remains docked at your station, why its crew continues to breathe, why you have not acted. "With respect, Admiral," I said, keeping my voice level, "I have chosen not to carry out that directive." The chamber behind her went still. The officers flanking her turned their heads in the same slow, unified motion. I felt Brix shift at my side. I did not look at him. "You choose to disregard a direct order of the ruling Senate," the Admiral said. "I do." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," I said, "that the humans aboard my station have delivered information of the highest consequence to the continued existence of every species the Concord represents. Information that demands to be heard before any action is taken. That determination is not yours to make. It is today, Admiral." Her expression did not shift. Her tone did not change. But I felt her attention narrow on me, like a shaft of cold light. "Warden Kess," she said, "you have served with distinction for 30 cycles. I have no desire to end that service in this manner. I will extend to you one opportunity to comply. Stand down your crew, unseal the airlock on the human vessel, vent the quarantine chamber, return to your duty. If you do so now, I will record your hesitation as a moment of confusion and nothing beyond that." She paused. "If you refuse, I will destroy the vessel, the quarantine level, and any section of your station that impedes the operation. And I will ensure that your name is struck from every record of service across the Concord. Your family will be informed that you died of illness. You will be forgotten before your remains have cooled." I felt Yala tremble slightly beside me. I reached over and briefly rested my hand on her shoulder. "Admiral Tessenball," I said, "I have one question for you before I answer." Her eyes did not blink. "Ask." "When did you last dream, Admiral?" Complete silence on the deck. She held my gaze. For a moment, something shifted across her face, a brief tightening at the corners of her eyes. Then the surface closed again. "Your question is irrelevant." "On the contrary," I said, "I believe it is the most consequential question I have ever posed. When did you last dream? When did you last laugh without first considering whether to? When did you last hold a position that contradicted the Senate, even on something minor? When did you last feel uncertain?" "Warden Kess," she said, her voice tightening, "you are wasting what little patience I have remaining. I am not attempting to provoke you, Admiral. I am trying to determine whether you are still present behind your own eyes." A sound to my right. Ovsik had stepped forward. His hand moved within his robe. Brenna registered it an instant before I did. She moved swiftly for a senior officer. She caught his arm before the concealed cutting instrument could clear the fabric. Brix reached him immediately, guiding Osik firmly but carefully to the floor. The liaison did not resist. He simply lay there, eyes flat, breathing evenly, like a figure whose controls had been briefly disconnected. "Warden," Brenna said quietly. It was set to full discharge. Secure him with care, I said. He is a casualty of this, not a criminal. On the screen, the Admiral watched all of it without any variation in her expression. Admiral, I said, turning back to her, the veil is not what you were told. The orders you carry tonight are not entirely your own. I believe some part of you already senses this. I am asking that part of you to speak, just once, before you issue the command to fire on my station. Her mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. For a single moment, her eyes became the eyes of a living person. They widened. They looked lost. Then they went flat once more. Fire, she said quietly. Brick spoke one word into his console. Broadcast. Every transmission array on silent, I activated at once. The complete testimony of Captain Amara Vale, recorded in full, rendered into every major Concord language, poured outward across hundreds of channels simultaneously. Her voice, composed and precise, laid out the truth of the veil, the quiet ones, the dreams, the unseen hand that had rested upon the galaxy's mind for 10,000 cycles. In every inhabited system within range, officers stirred at their posts and looked up at their screens with confusion and disbelief. The Admiral's fleet opened fire. The first volley crossed our shields. Alarms filled the air. The deck lurched underfoot. A younger crew member in a peripheral station was thrown from her seat. Brenna moved to assist her. Return fire into open space, I said. Mark our trajectory. Do not aim toward their vessels. We are not here to harm their crews. We are here to buy the signal time. Bricks worked quickly. Warning discharges curve away from the Admiral's ships into the dark, tracing bright arcs across the void, ensuring that sensor stations across 100 directions would capture the event in full. A second volley struck us. A section of outer hull failed. Emergency seals engaged. The lights stuttered and held. Yala's hands flew across her console, maintaining our readings, keeping the signal strong. Then one of the ships in the Admiral's formation broke away. I stared at the screen. A second vessel followed. Then a third. 3 Concord warships turned and positioned themselves between my station and the Admiral's command vessel. A new voice came through our speakers, younger, unsteady. This is Captain Orrin Mallory of the Concord cruiser Straight Dawn. I have received the transmission. My crew has received the transmission. We will not fire on Silent Eye. I call on every vessel in this formation to stand down and listen. Another voice joined his. Then another. Within moments, 5 of the 12 ships in the Admiral's fleet had turned, their weapons now oriented outward, shielding us. On the main screen, Admiral Tessenvold's face went still. Her lips moved without producing sound. Then, very gradually, her eyes changed. They became the eyes of someone awake. Her hand rose to cover her mouth. She looked at the order she had just issued. She looked at the ships that had turned against her. She looked at my battered, unyielding station on her display. Cease fire. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Her officers hesitated. Cease fire, she said again louder. Her voice broke. By every light in the sky, cease fire. The weapons of the loyal half of her fleet fell quiet. It was over almost before it had fully begun. The Admiral ordered her ships to stand down and surrendered her command to Captain Mallory, who pledged, with a trembling voice, to treat her with full dignity and see her to a place where she could recover and speak for herself. On my deck, we assessed the damage. The station was heavily compromised. Multiple systems were offline. 2 of my crew had been seriously hurt, but were alive. None had been lost. Below in the quarantine chamber, Captain Vale and her crew were unharmed. She stood by the glass as I descended in the lift, her tired eyes soft with relief. You remain loud, Warden. I had an excellent teacher, I answered. We held each other's gaze through the glass for a long, quiet moment, and then, all across the vast dark spaces of the galaxy, something began to shift. The transmission had traveled farther than any of us had dared to imagine. Across 100 worlds, citizens paused in the streets, hands first to their ears, then to their heads, then reaching for one another. Some wept, some raised their voices, some simply sat down where they stood and looked at nothing for a very long time. Governments convened emergency councils. Scholars retrieved ancient records from forgotten shelves. Wardens across many sectors began, for the first time in their careers, to ask the questions they had always been gently steered away from. Not every mind awakened. Some had been held too long or too deeply, or could not sustain the weight of what waking would require. But enough did, far more than enough. The quiet hand that had rested on the galaxy's consciousness for 10,000 cycles began, at last, to lift. Not completely, not in a single moment. The quiet ones still slumbered within their fractured prison, and their dreams still seeped into the spaces between worlds. But now the galaxy knew. Now we could name what we felt. Now, when an unfamiliar thought arrived, we could recognize it and set it gently aside. In the weeks that followed, a new coalition began to take shape. It was messier than the old Concord, louder, more contentious, more alive with disagreement. Humans occupied its founding table, not as champions or authorities, but as peculiar, tenacious, distant relatives who had walked into the dark and returned with a warning. Captain Vale was given no title and no monument. She asked for neither. She asked only for quiet rooms where her crew could sleep undisturbed, and for meals as long as they were needed. She received both. Admiral Tessenball, once the fog receded fully, was devastated by what she had nearly done. She withdrew from public life. In her final recorded message to the galaxy, she asked only that her past speeches be reconsidered with fresh understanding, so that others might learn to distinguish between their own convictions and those that had been arranged for them. It was, I believe, the most genuine thing she had ever said. Ovsik recovered gradually. He remembered little of what he had attempted. When he was shown the recordings, he wept. I visited him in his quarters several times. I told him that the hand that had raised a weapon had not truly been his own. I cannot say whether he believed me, but he returned in time to modest work in a small administrative office on a quiet world, where he maintained records of retired wardens. He sent letters occasionally. The penmanship was unsteady, but the words were his. Brix retired the year following the confrontation. He said that 30 cycles of service and one impossible night were sufficient for any Thran engineer. He acquired a small dwelling on a green moon and cultivated unusual bright flowering plants. I visited when I was able. We rarely spoke of the Vale. We did not need to. Yala did not retire. Yala flourished. She departed my station to pursue the studies she had been quietly diverted from as a child. She became one of the foremost young researchers in the study of cognitive influence, working alongside humans and others to develop instruments that could help even the most private minds detect the touch of an external presence. Her name appeared within a few cycles in publications across many worlds. I kept a copy of her first paper on the wall of my office. I had no claim to her accomplishment. I was proud regardless. As for me, I remained at my post. Silent, I was rebuilt. Its scars were preserved deliberately. As a reminder, its purpose was transformed. We were no longer a solitary outpost monitoring a place no one was permitted to approach. We had become a shared watch, staffed by crew members from many species, humans among them, whose task was to tend the fractured prison at the edge of our sky. We studied the Vale. We reinforced its seals where we could. We trained others to do the same. Captain Amara Vale, old now, silver running all the way through her hair, spent her final cycles aboard Silent Eye. She taught classes to young officers of every background. She repeated the same lessons, plainly and without ceremony. Notice your thoughts. Ask where they originate. Disagree with yourself from time to time. Speak when something feels quiet that should be loud. Stay stubborn. Stay kind. Stay awake. On the last evening I spent with her, we sat together on the observation deck, looking out at the Vale. It still churned, slow and ancient, far beyond our shields, but it no longer felt like a forbidden secret. It felt like a patient in our care. Difficult, potentially dangerous, but no longer unknown. Warden Kess, she said quietly, may I ask you something I have wondered for a long time? Always, Captain. What made you hesitate that first night? When Ovsik told you to fire, when every law you had served said to act, what made you stop? I considered it for a long moment. I had considered it many times across the cycles. I think I said slowly. It was your voice. My voice. When you asked for a hot meal, I said, after 400 cycles and a journey no one else had ever survived, you did not ask for amnesty. You did not ask for honor. You asked for a hot meal. It was such a small thing, such a human thing. I had been trained my entire life to regard anything from the Veil as a danger, but dangers do not ask for hot meals. Exhausted travelers do. Some small, loud part of me refused to fire on an exhausted traveler. The rest of me caught up later. She laughed. It was a soft, tired, beautiful sound. A hot meal saved the galaxy, she said. A hot meal, I agreed, and a very stubborn captain. We watched the Veil together a while longer. Then she said, almost to herself, You know, Warden, I have been asked 1,000 times what I believe makes humans what we are. Why we were the ones who could not be shaped. Why our minds were too disorderly for the quiet ones to penetrate. I have offered many answers over the years. Careful ones, analytical ones. But I think the plainest answer is this. No one ever told us we could not. So we did. And when we were told we should not, we asked why. And when the answers failed to satisfy us, we went and found out for ourselves. That is a dangerous way to live. I said gently. Yes, she agreed. It is also the only way I know. I lifted my cup toward her. To the stubborn, I said. She raised hers. To the awake, she answered. Our cups met softly in the still air. Outside the great window, the Veil turned, slow and ancient, holding its sleeping prisoners, watched now by living eyes that would not be shut again. And beyond it, in every direction, the galaxy hummed with the messy, contentious, luminous sound of minds that remember how to speak for themselves. Old Warden Kess, who had once kept watch over a forbidden zone from a solitary post and believed that was a whole of my duty, smiled into the dark. I had found the loudest voice of my life, and I intended, for as long as breath remained in me, to keep using it.